Hello, my name is Phil Easter, historian and writer from Baltimore, Maryland, also known as the Amazing Memory Man. We're recording this afternoon on Sunday, May 14th, 2023. This is story number 26 on my YouTube channel, which is Phil Easter, the Amazing Memory Man. Today I'm going to share information on past events in history and several interesting things in my own personal life for every day of the month of May, all 31 days. I will do this all from memory with no notes in front of me whatsoever. Just briefly, I would also like to mention that back in 2016 and 2017, I was the subject of medical science research at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine in Baltimore about my outstanding memory talent. I was interviewed by two doctors who did a study on me, and the younger doctor, a professor at the Homewood campus of the Hopkins University, teaches a course every spring semester called The Neuroscience of Learning and Memory to undergraduate students who plan to go on to medical school in most cases. And so 6 times since the year 2016, I've been a special guest at his class once a year, usually in late April or early May, towards the end of the semester. And we did this 4 years in a row, 2016 through 19. Unfortunately, 2020 and 2021, because of the pandemic, we could not do it in person. But then we resumed last year, 2022, and again just a few weeks ago, on April 27th, 2023, for the 6th time altogether. I spoke before his class for about 45 minutes, talking about my various life experiences, all from memory and also certain events in history. And the young students would sometimes raise their hand and mention their birthday. I could tell them something famous that happened off the top of my head with no notes in front of me. And I'm proud to say I am 7 decades now, I'm 70 years old, and I can still do this despite having some medical problems, but not memory. Well, today we're going to, as I say, mention events for every day of May from different years. So here we go. May 1st, in the year 1769, Sir Arthur Wellesley was born in Dublin. At that time, the English ruled Ireland, and he was part of an aristocratic family, the Wellesley family, but he becomes best known years later as the Duke of Wellington, and his great achievement of winning one of the greatest battles in world history. He was the commanding general of the English army that defeated Napoleon at the Great Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815. So again, Sir Arthur Wellesley, also known as the Duke of Wellington, born May 1st, 1769. May 2nd, in 2011, that was the day that our U.S. Navy SEALs administered justice to that disgusting terrorist, Osama bin Laden. He was the architect of the 9/11 terrorist attack on September 11, 2001, where close to 3,000 innocent people died. And on May 2nd, 2011, U.S. Navy SEALs killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. May 3rd, in 1999, I saw an unusual baseball game here in Baltimore. The Baltimore Orioles were not playing another American League team that day. They played the national team from the country of Cuba at Oriole Park, and I saw that game in person on May 3rd, 1999. The Cubans won the game by a score of 12-6. May 4th, in 1970, the Vietnam War was going on, and there were many protests throughout this country in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And on May 4th, 1970, a protest at Kent State University in Ohio, sadly, 4 college students were killed by the Ohio National Guard. on May 4th, 1970. This became one of the most famous news events of the year 1970. May 5th, in 1821, Napoleon died on the island of St. Helena. After he was defeated at Waterloo in 1815, the British sent him to the island of St. Helena, and that's where he died on May 5th, 1821, at age 51. May 6th, a very important date in sports history, and really, you could almost say in medical history. For many years, it was said that no one could run 1 mile in under 4 minutes. Even many doctors and scientists said it was impossible. The human body could not run a mile under 4 minutes. However, on that evening of May 6, 1954, at the famous Oxford University in England, there was a track meet between Oxford and another college. A young 25-year-old medical student, Roger Bannister, became the first person to ever run 1 mile under 4 minutes. He did it in 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds. Just 0.6 of a second under 4 minutes. But under was under, and thus he made history. A track and field history, and the news was flashed around the world, and the next day, the headline of many newspapers in many different countries. Not just the headline on the sports page, but the headline on the front news page was that Roger Bannister had broken the 4-minute mile, a tremendous achievement. He was later knighted by Queen Elizabeth II and became a very great doctor in neurology. Sir Roger Bannister, first person to run 1 mile under 4 minutes on May 6, 1954. May 7th, in 1915, on that day, the British ocean liner Lusitania was sunk by a German submarine during World War I. About 1,200 people perished, but several hundred people did make it to Queenstown, Ireland, about 2 miles away. But at least 1,200 people died, including about 128 Americans. And that was one of the events that angered many Americans, and 2 years later, the United States entered World War I on April 6, 1917. But again, the Lusitania was sunk by the German submarine, May 7, 1915. May 8th, the birthday of Harry Truman. In 1884, Harry Truman was born in the state of Missouri. He became vice president under Franklin Roosevelt in the 1940s, and when Roosevelt died on April 12, 1945, Harry Truman became the 33rd president of the United States. May 9th. Here I go to an event in my personal life. In 1969, May 9th was my junior prom. My junior year in high school, we had our junior prom on May 9th, 1969. May 10th, 1940, that was the day that the Conservative Party of Great Britain changed prime ministers. Neville Chamberlain had been prime minister for several years, but he miscalculated the danger of Adolf Hitler, and World War II began the previous year in 1939. So on May 10th, 1940, the Conservative Party chose Winston Churchill to become prime minister, and thus almost all historians would agree Winston Churchill was the greatest prime minister in British history. He led his country during the greatest war in history for most of the war. He was also prime minister a second time from 1951 through 1955. So his first premiership, I should point out, was 1940 to 45, and second time 1951 to 55. He was 65 years old when he became prime minister on May 10, 1940. His speeches inspired the British people during that critical time when London was bombed and other English cities also were bombed by the Germans. Winston Churchill became prime minister May 10, 1940. A very good movie came out just a couple years ago called Darkest Hour. I suggest people should look that movie up, and it tells about the first few weeks of Churchill's premiership in 1940. May 11th, the great musical composer Irving Berlin was born in Russia on May 11th, 1888, but he came to America just a few years later. His family brought him to America. He became an American citizen. Over many years, Irving Berlin wrote more than 800 songs. Unbelievable, it really is. So many popular songs, including God Bless America and White Christmas, two of the most famous songs ever written. Irving Berlin, born May 11th, 1888. May 12th. On May 12th, 1820, Florence Nightingale was born in England. She became a famous nurse, especially during the Crimean War. In the 1850s, she cared for many British soldiers, and she is considered the patron saint of nursing. Florence Nightingale, born in Florence, Italy, of English parents, so they named her after that beautiful city, but she was English, and she was born May 12th, 1820. She lived all the way to 1910, 90 years, a remarkable life. May 13th, in 1935, that was the day that Thomas Edward Lawrence, known to history as Lawrence of Arabia, had his motorcycle accident in England, and he died 6 days later, only 47 years old. On that road that day, he was coming around a curve, and two young boys on bicycles suddenly appeared. So he swerved not to hit them and was killed in that accident. A man who fought in World War I and survived great battles between 1915 and 1918 ends up getting killed on a little country road. T.E. Lawrence, known as Lawrence of Arabia. May 14th, in 1998, that was the day the great American singer Frank Sinatra died. One of the most popular singers, especially during the 1940s and 50s. Frank Sinatra died May 14th, 1998. May 15th, way back in 1918, that was the day that baseball great Walter Johnson, pitcher for the Washington Senators, he pitched an 18-inning game. And most games go 9 innings, but it went to extra innings, and he won by the simple score of 1-0. His team finally scored 1 run. He pitched 18 games. That's like pitching 2 baseball games, really. An incredible feat of endurance. Walter Johnson, one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history, winning the game 1-0 on May 15th, 1918. May 16th. And on May 16th, it is, I tell you truly, this is one of the few times I'm drawing a blank. I admit, under a little bit of pressure, I'm drawing a blank for this day. My apologies. It doesn't happen often. But right now I am. Okay, that's one day. But May 17th was the day the New York Stock Exchange was founded in the year 1796. Way back in 1796, what we call the New York Stock Exchange was founded on that day. May 18th, my favorite baseball player ever as I was growing up was Brooks Robinson of the Baltimore Orioles. He's considered the greatest defensive third baseman in baseball history. Well, he was born May 18th, 1937 in the state of Arkansas, but he played for the Baltimore Orioles from 1955 through 1977. I saw him play many times. My favorite baseball player I ever saw in person. Born May 18th, 1937. May 19th, in 1994, that was the day that former First Lady Jackie Kennedy Onassis died. On May 19th, 1994, the wife of President John F. Kennedy. And she later married Aristotle Onassis, a wealthy Greek shipping tycoon. She died May 19th, 1994. May 20th, in 1927, that was the day that the young American pilot, Charles Lindbergh, began his flight across the Atlantic Ocean, which lasted a little more than 24 hours. In a small airplane called the Spirit of St. Louis, he flew across the Atlantic Ocean, arrived in Paris the next day on May 21st at nighttime. What a brave young man. And he admitted later he almost fell asleep at one point. He started to doze off, and he suddenly realized he was just a few feet above the ocean. He would have crashed into the ocean and certainly would have been killed. But he completed that flight on May 21st. So that 2-day period, you could say the flight of Charles Lindbergh, May 20 and May 21st, 1927. May 22nd was the birthday of the great English actor Sir Laurence Olivier. He was born May 22nd, 1907 in England. Sir Laurence Olivier made many movies, especially known for his Shakespearean roles. He played Hamlet, Richard III, and Henry V. And in those movies, in two of those movies, Richard III and Hamlet, he produced and directed the movies, but had played the main part as well. His one Oscar award was in 1948. He won Best Actor for Hamlet, and the movie won Best Picture. And as producer, he then kept the award for Best Picture of the Year. Laurence Olivier, born May 22nd, 1907. May 23rd, the famous English ship Bounty left England on May 23rd, 1787. It was 2 years later where the famous mutiny took place when the crew rebelled against Captain Bligh, but that was in 1789. But the Bounty left England on May 23rd, 1787. May 24th was the birthday of Queen Victoria, the great British Queen, born May 24th, 1819. She reigned from 1837 until her death on January 22nd, 1901. But her birthday, May 24th, and in Britain and some Commonwealth countries, they still call that Victoria Day. It was also the birthday of the great American singer and songwriter Bob Dylan, born May 24th, 1941. In the 1960s, he had many famous songs, especially Blowing in the Wind and The Times They Are A-Changin'. May 25th, one of the greatest days in sports history, in 1935. As the great baseball player Babe Ruth was coming towards the end of his career, he hit 3 home runs in one game at age 40. The last 3 home runs he ever hit, number 7, 12, 13, and 14. Ironically, on that same day, May 25th in 1935, another athlete started to gain national fame, and that was 23-year-old Jesse Owens, a student at Ohio State University, who that day in a big track meet at Ann Arbor, Michigan, he set 3 world records and tied another in less than 1 hour. In various running events, and the long jump in particular, his world record stood for 25 years. Not until 1960 did someone jump further, which is really amazing. From 1935 to 1960, that world record held up. So the same day Jesse Owens became famous as a track athlete, Babe Ruth's career was winding down, hitting those 3 home runs in the same game, May 25th, 1935. May 26th was the birthday of an Oriole manager, a Baltimore Orioles manager named Joe Altobelli. His birthday was May 26th, and in 1983, which is now 40 years ago, the last time the Orioles won the World Series, Joe Altobelli was the Oriole manager. The first 2 times the Orioles won the series was in 1966 and 1970 under Hank Bauer and Earl Weaver. But Joe Altobelli is remembered the last Oriole manager when the Orioles won the World Series in 1983. May 27th, in 1915, that was the day that the German ship Bismarck during World War I was sank by the British. A few days before, the Bismarck had destroyed the HMS Hood, a great battleship that the British had, and 3 days later, British torpedo planes found the Bismarck and they sank the Bismarck, Germany's most famous battleship. May 28th was the birthday of one of the greatest athletes of all time. The great American Indian Jim Thorpe was born May 28, 1888, in the state of Oklahoma. As a college football player, he gained fame at a small college in Pennsylvania called Carlisle. And at that time, around 1910, 1911, they played major universities like Harvard and some other Ivy League schools, and sometimes beat them in football. But he's also a great track athlete, and he made the U.S. Olympic team in 1912 in Stockholm, Sweden. Jim Thorpe won the pentathlon and the decathlon, two new events in track and field at that time. Since then, the pentathlon has been dropped from the program, from the track and field program of the Olympics, but they still have the decathlon, 10 events over a 2-day period. And Jim Thorpe won that first decathlon way back in 1912. But also, on May 28, 2007, not so many years ago, a very happy day in my life, I've been following Johns Hopkins lacrosse since 1967. At that point, it was 40 years. I saw them play many games at Hopkins, and I twice saw them play for the national championship before 2007. But they lost those games to Virginia in 1972 and in 2003. But in 2007, I saw Hopkins for the third time in the national championship game against Duke. It was played at M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore, and Hopkins won a very close game, 12-11. So I was very happy finally to see Johns Hopkins University win the national championship in lacrosse in person. I'd seen it on TV sometimes, but it was great to see the game in person. May 29th, two famous Americans have birthdays. The great comedian and entertainer Bob Hope was born May 29, 1903. He lived to be 100 years old. A wonderful career of acting in many movies and entertaining people with his comedy skits. He often went to military bases in foreign countries during World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War to entertain American troops. But also, on May 29, 1917, President John F. Kennedy was born in Brookline, Massachusetts, near Boston. He became the second youngest president in American history when he won the election in 1960. Inaugurated at age 43, but as many people know, sadly he was assassinated on November 22, 1963, just 46 years old. But his birthday was May 29, 1917. Later this year, I intend to do a special YouTube story about the life of John F. Kennedy as we get closer to the fall season, because this year, November 22nd, marks exactly 60 years of his assassination, which I remember. I was 11 years old and in the 6th grade. So again, later this year, we'll do a YouTube story just about John Kennedy. May 30th, for many years was known as Memorial Day. Actually, it started a few years after the Civil War, and at first it was called Decoration Day, and sometimes later we call it Memorial Day, often celebrated on May 30th, but since 1971, the Congress declared it would be the last Monday of May. So now, the last Monday of May could be any day between the 25th and 31st, so it's no longer always celebrated May 30th. Once in a while, it would still be May 30th. But just so you know, before 1971, Memorial Day was May 30th, no matter what day of the week it was. And now May 31st, the last day of the month, is the birthday of the great actor Clint Eastwood. He was born on that day in 1930, so he will be 93 years old in a few more weeks. Clint Eastwood, born the last day of May in 1930. Also, in my personal life, it was a day, 53 years ago, I graduated from high school. I graduated officially from Mount St. Joseph High School in Baltimore on the last day of May in 1970, but our graduation ceremony was at a cathedral here in Baltimore called the Cathedral of Mary Our Queen, often just called the New Cathedral, to differentiate from the Basilica downtown, which is much older. So the last day of May was my official high school graduation day. Well, those are the many events I know for the month of May to share with you today. This is Phil Easter, the Amazing Memory Man. We'll see you next time. Another story on another subject. Have a good evening.